Well, with only 64 days in a campaign, candidates are usually campaigning very hard, but not Donald Trump, the laziest presidential campaigner in modern history. Yesterday, there were only 64 campaign days left, but Donald Trump did nothing. And his running mate, James David Vance, did nothing. Of course, campaigning on Labor Day isn't easy for Republican candidates like Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, who are so anti-labor, because they can't say things like this on Labor Day.
Everywhere I go, I tell people, look, you may not be a union member. You better thank a union member for the 5-day work week. You better thank a union member for sick leave. You better thank a union member for paid leave. You better thank a union member for vacation time. Because what we know is when union wages go up, everybody's wages go up. When union workplaces are safer, every workplace is safer. When unions are strong, America is strong. Is strong.
That was Vice President Kamala Harris campaigning yesterday on Labor Day in Detroit before heading to Pennsylvania to deliver her pro-labor message to a Pittsburgh Labor Day audience where she was joined by President Joe Biden. The president and vice president's Labor Day began as a work day in the White House, a very serious work day in the Situation Room. President Biden released this video yesterday saying, quote, Vice President Harris and I met in the Situation Room with the U.S. hostage deal negotiation team following the murder of Hersh Goldberg Poland and 5 other hostages by Hamas. We are devastated and outraged. Make no mistake, Hamas leaders will pay for these crimes. We also discussed next steps in the ongoing effort to secure the release of hostages and bring them home. Before the meeting in the Situation Room, President Biden said this to reporters.
Are you planning to present a final hostage deal to both sides this week?
We're very close to that.
What makes you think that this deal will be successful in a way that the other deals were not?
Hope springs eternal.
Mr. President, do you think it's time for Prime Minister Netanyahu to do more on this issue? Do you think he's doing enough?
No.
Mr. President, what is your reaction to the demonstrations across Israel? What is your reaction to the demonstrations?
I'm going to get the detail when I walk in, and I'll talk to you after that, okay?
In Israel yesterday, there were mass demonstrations, including a general strike led by Israeli protesters who blamed Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for failing to negotiate the release of all the hostages. The Justice Department, led by Attorney General Merrick Garland, charged 6 leaders of Hamas with conspiracy to murder U.S. nationals and other criminal charges in a 38-page criminal complaint unsealed today in the Southern District of New York. Today, Attorney General Garland said, the charges unsealed today are just one part of our effort to target every aspect of Hamas's operations. These actions will not be our last. Donald Trump issued written statements on social media this weekend blaming Hamas's execution of the hostages on President Biden and Vice President Harris. Donald Trump never mentioned Benjamin Netanyahu in his public statements. Donald Trump did not say whether he agrees with President Biden that Benjamin Netanyahu has not done enough to secure the release of the hostages. Donald Trump did not say whether he agrees with the Israeli people who say that Benjamin Netanyahu has not done enough to secure the release of the hostages. Donald Trump did say that he looks forward to discussing this issue at the debate next week, but you can be absolutely certain that Donald Trump will not say one coherent sentence about what his policy would be involving Israel and Hamas. While Donald Trump did nothing on Labor Day, Kamala Harris brought her boss with her to campaign in Pennsylvania.
Kamala Harris so proud of the greatest job creation record of any president in a single term in American history.
It was all about jobs and economic development in Joe Biden's Labor Day speech supporting Kamala Harris for president.
Now, I'll tell you something. Kamala and I are damn proud that we protected the pensions of over 1 million workers and retirees. Union workers are rebuilding American infrastructure and building new factories here in America. They told me we couldn't get anything done in infrastructure. $1.2 trillion we got done. Remember Trump, for 4 years, promised every month Infrastructure Week. For 4 years he promised that. He didn't build a damn thing. Nothing. I mean, not nothing. Well, thanks to our infrastructure law, Pennsylvania so far has received $17 billion. $17 billion. Over 2,000 projects, from clean water to affordable high-speed internet for every Pennsylvanian. The projects that include $858 million to expand the Montgomery Lock better to accommodate bigger barges, to get millions of tons of goods and shelves faster and more reliable, and create thousands of union jobs.
Joe Biden was very much at home campaigning in that Union Hall in Pittsburgh.
When you're in Pittsburgh, you're standing with steel workers. Let's be clear. I believe in American steel companies, American-owned and operated steel companies.
Joe Biden told the Pittsburgh audience about what he called the single best decision he made as president.
Let me tell you about this woman. I know her. I trust her. Not a joke. I trust her. Number two, the first decision I made, the nominee in 2020, was selecting her as my vice president. And by the way, it was the single best decision I made as President of the United States of America. I've watched her when all the experts, foreign and domestic policy, would give us advice, then we'd sit alone in a room. And she has a backbone like a ramrod. And she has the moral compass of a saint. This woman knows what she's doing. Folks, I promise you, if you elect Kamala Harris as president, it'll be the best decision you will have ever made. And Kamala believes as I do. The unions are the spine of this economy. She'll be a historic pro-union president. So, folks, we got one more job to do together. Let me ask you, are you ready to fight? Are you ready to win? Are you ready to elect Kamala Harris, our next president of the United States of America? And in the process, are you ready to make Donald Trump a loser again? I've never been more optimistic about America. We have to remember who we are. We're the United States of America. There's nothing, I mean this from the bottom of my heart, there's nothing beyond our capacity. Nothing. When we do it together. And that means elect my friend, our great Vice President, President of the United States, Kamala Harris.
I'ma keep on running 'cause the winner don't quit on themselves.
Vice President Harris began her remarks by thanking the man who introduced her.
And I have spent more time with this extraordinary human being when the cameras were not in the room, when the stakes were high, when the heat was intense. And Joe Biden has always stood with the workers of America and labor unions of America. Always. Always. And I say to all of the friends here, the press that's in the room, history will show what we here know. Joe Biden has been one of the most transformative presidents in the United States that we have ever witnessed. And it comes from his heart.
Vice President Harris outlined the stakes in the election this way.
You know, in this election, there are two very different visions for our nation. One, ours, focused on the future. The other, focused on the past. We fight for the future. We fight for a future of dignity, respect, and opportunity for all people. So we're 64 days out from this election. Ballots in Pennsylvania will start dropping in 14 days. But as we fight to move forward, Donald Trump is trying to pull us backward, including back to a time before workers had the freedom to organize.
He's going to jail.
Well, the courts will handle that, and we will handle November. How about that? We'll handle November. Let the courts handle that other thing. But we're not going back. We're not going back. And one of the ways we're going to guarantee we don't go back is that we remember. Right? It is important to remember what that was and what it is. Yeah. Remember, as president, Donald Trump blocked overtime benefits for millions of workers. He opposed efforts to raise the minimum wage. As the president said, he appointed union busters to the National Labor Relations Board. And don't forget, he supported so-called right-to-work laws. And if Donald Trump were to be reelected, he intends to give more tax cuts to billionaires and big corporations. He intends to cut Social Security and Medicare. He wants to impose what, in effect, would be a national sales tax. I call it the Trump national sales tax on everyday products and basic necessities that would cost a typical American family, the economists have said this, almost $4,000 a year. He intends to repeal the Affordable Care Act and take us back to what we remember, because it wasn't that long ago, was a time when insurance companies could deny people with pre-existing conditions. You remember what that was? Children with asthma, breast cancer survivors, grandparents with diabetes. Well, look, America has tried those failed policies before, and we are not going back. We are not going back.
Leading off our discussion tonight is Quentin Folks, Principal Deputy Campaign Manager for the Harris-Walz campaign. Thank you very much for joining us again. Now, I have told the audience of this program for most of the last year that they can ignore polls, wait till we get to August, and especially wait until we get to after Labor Day to begin to look at the polls, because that's when they begin to reflect a voting reality. I'm looking at these swing state polls, these recent swing state polls, and your candidate, Vice President Harris, is ahead of Donald Trump in pretty much all of the swing states, or tied, and according to one of these polls, in Arizona. What do you expect to see in terms of any more movement in the polls? Is this pretty much the way it's going to go from here to the finish line with the polls?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Lawrence. It's always a pleasure to be with you. Look, what I would say is the polls is that we're going to run through the tape. Look, this is going to be an extremely close election, and we remain the underdogs in this race, regardless of how it feels out there. And the best course of action for our campaign is continue to do everything that we have been doing, campaigning actually, and being out speaking and communicating to voters about the issues that matter most. Look, fundamentally, this election is about who is looking out for you. The vice president has a vision for the future of this country, and Donald Trump wants to take us back. We're going to continue to campaign and making sure we're putting in the work to speak to every single voter across this country, both Democrats and Republicans, because we have a story to tell. We have a vision under the vice president's leadership, and so we're not focused on the polls and what the polls are saying. We're going to continue to campaign for the next 63 days here and make sure that we win this thing in November.
No one in American politics knows more about winning swing states than you do. You helped Senator Warnock win how many elections in Georgia? It was a handful. And obviously you can move those skills to other states. But as you look at this swing state map, does it look the way, let's say, the Georgia electorate looked to you as you were approaching those elections in Georgia for Senator Warnock?
Yeah, look, it does. Look, I think every single one of these states, we treat as individuals, although we know that the goal is to get to 270 electoral votes. But our campaign has made sure that we have invested in every single one of these states and built campaign apparatuses that can communicate to voters in every single one of these states. We know that this is going to be won and lost on the ground in the states. And so what I'm most proud of is that when we're traveling across this country, we're going outside of the major metro areas, urban areas, where people expect Democrats to be, and communicating with voters in smaller markets like Savannah. And so we're doing that across the country in places like Arizona and Nevada, Michigan, Pennsylvania, because we have to communicate with all voters. And so in races this tight with the margins this thin, that is the type of strategy that you have to do. You also have to communicate on the issues. I'm very proud of the type of attention that our campaign pays to the states on an individual level to make sure that we're talking to voters about the things that they're feeling and seeing in their everyday lives that are going to ultimately matter to them as they head to the polls to make this decision about who's going to be elected the next president of the United States.
Well, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance gave away Labor Day yesterday. They just gave it to you. They stayed home to do nothing. That seemed to open up the day for your campaign on a very strong economic emphasis and, in particular, infrastructure emphasis, what the Biden-Harris administration has achieved there and what that means for jobs. Is that the way that argument is going to be made for the rest of this campaign?
Well, look, we can't control what Donald Trump or J.D. Vance ultimately decide to do, but the reason that they're not campaigning on days like Labor Day is because they don't have anything to say to American workers, because under Donald Trump, he left this country with fewer jobs than when he came into office. Under Vice President Harris's leadership, she and President Biden created nearly 16 million jobs. The Vice President cast the deciding vote that saved hundreds of thousands of pensions, doubled investment into thousands of infrastructure projects that created jobs across this country. And now, as she is running for president of the United States, she's rolled out economic policies that would do things like lower costs and stop corporations, particularly food suppliers, from gouging prices simply because they can in extreme circumstances. She's also making sure that she's capping the cost of prescription drugs, and on top of that, building more affordable housing units in this country to make sure that rent and mortgages are cheaper for Americans. That is where her focus is, and she's made it clear that the middle class, workers, and small business are going to be the priority of her administration.
You are one of the people who managed the transition from the Biden for president campaign to the Harris for president campaign, and I must say managed it so successfully and smoothly. What was it like for you personally to see Joe Biden up there on the campaign stage in Pittsburgh yesterday? The last time you were on this program, you were here for the Biden for president campaign.
Well, my first thought is, man, he is as good as I remember. But it was great to see him there. And the reason why the transition went so smoothly on this campaign is because of President Biden's leadership, his service to this country, obviously making the ultimate sacrifice and putting his money where his mouth is and doing the ultimately selfless thing, which Donald Trump knows nothing about. And then on the flip side of that, Vice President Harris's leadership as coming in to take over the top of this ticket and how she kept this team together. Because at the end of the day, we're all united behind one common goal, and that is to make sure that Donald Trump does not get anywhere in power. But yesterday was a very, very special day for me to see President Biden back out on the trail. And obviously, look, he gave me an opportunity to play politics on this level, and for that, I'll forever be grateful. But my task now and the ultimate thing that I can give to him is make sure I'm doing everything I can over the next 63 days to make sure that I elect Kamala Harris as President of the United States.
Quentin, folks, thank you very much for starting off our discussions tonight.
Thank you, Lawrence. I appreciate it.
And coming up, Andrew Weissman will join us for the latest defendant Trump news, and there's a bunch of it. That's next. Today, a federal judge in New York issued the first ruling ever on how the Supreme Court's new presidential immunity decision should be applied to Donald Trump. Trump lawyers asked a federal judge this morning to throw out Donald Trump's criminal convictions on 34 counts of business fraud and his payoffs to porn star Stormy Daniels. The Trump lawyers' argument was based on the Supreme Court's recent immunity decision. Federal Judge Alvin Hellerstein issued a written opinion 5 hours after receiving the Trump appeal. Judge Hellerstein wrote, "Nothing in the Supreme Court's opinion affects my previous conclusion that the hush money payments were private, unofficial acts outside the bounds of executive authority." Judge Hellerstein ruled against Donald Trump last year when Trump lawyers tried to have that case brought by Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg moved to federal court. At that time, Judge Hellerstein rejected Donald Trump's attempt to move the case to federal court, saying hush money paid to an adult film star is not related to a president's official acts. In their motion today, the Trump lawyers once again asked for the case to be moved to federal court if the judge didn't overturn the whole thing, and Judge Hellerstein once again denied that request. That means that the case now awaits a trial judge, Juan Merchan's decision on how the Supreme Court's immunity ruling might affect the status of Donald Trump's convictions in that case. Judge Merchan has promised to release his decision on that issue prior to the currently scheduled sentencing date for Donald Trump in that case, which is September 18th. Near midnight on Friday night, Special Prosecutor Jack Smith and Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyers filed their suggestions to federal judge Tanya Chutkan on how to proceed in the Washington, D.C. case in which Donald Trump is accused of a conspiracy against the United States of America to overturn the results of the last presidential election. Judge Chutkan has scheduled a hearing in that case for Thursday of this week to consider how the Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity affects that case. Jack Smith has obtained a superseding indictment in that case, which he says fits within the evidentiary limits imposed on the case by the Supreme Court's immunity decision. That superseding indictment charges Donald Trump with the same 4 crimes he was charged with in the original indictment. Joining our discussion now is Andrew Weissman, former FBI general counsel and former chief of the criminal division in the Eastern District of New York. He's an MSNBC legal analyst and co-author of the New York Times best-selling book, The Trump Indictments. Andrew, let's begin with Judge Hellerstein today, the federal judge in New York, who's the first one to actually issue a ruling based on the Supreme Court's immunity decision, and he said has absolutely nothing to do with Stormy Daniels.
Yeah, well, a judge who I used to appear in front of used to say, I have 2 words for you, denied.
Yeah.
And this was a repeat motion, as you pointed out, which was there was a motion already that Donald Trump made saying that this case, the New York criminal case, should be tried in federal court, removing it from state courts. Federal court, that was denied by Judge Hellerstein. So this was another Hail Mary. And I think what you really are seeing here is judges who really take their oaths of office seriously for equal justice and are having none of the shenanigans of Donald Trump. It's like it doesn't matter if you're rich, white, powerful. You get equal justice, not more, not less. And this was, a frivolous argument, and it was denied in a cursory fashion, and it sends it back to Judge Merchan. As you said, in front of Judge Merchan, there is the issue that is pending of whether the certain types of evidence that the Supreme Court now has said you can't use, whether that sort of severely or sufficiently undermined the trial, so he would get a new trial. And assuming that's denied, there's the second issue, which is Donald Trump has a motion pending before Judge Merchan to put off the September 18th sentencing date. So those are the two things that are before Judge Merchan that we're waiting on.
And in Washington, in Judge Chutkan's courtroom on Thursday, what are we going to see? Well, we're not going to see anything, but we will have it reported to us.
Exactly. So we're back in front of an experienced judge, very much like Judge Hellerstein and like Judge Merchan. It's not somebody who's inexperienced like Judge Cannon. There's no sense of bias one way or the other. What you have is Jack Smith saying, we're ready to go. We can file our brief now. I mean, they literally said, we have the brief, we're ready. So we're ready to sort of move along. So you tell us to proceed, we will go forward. Donald Trump, as you can expect, it's a little like Scheherazade. He's like, you know what, let me just keep on filing additional briefs and let's just do this seriatim one after another. He doesn't want to see any filings by Jack Smith before the election. I mean, the schedule he proposed is basically, you can file after the election and even after the inauguration. So he really wants to see things put off. I don't think that is where Judge Chutkan is going to go. Remember, she has been waiting 8 months for this case to be sent back to her. And this is a routine scheduling matter. And the Supreme Court has actually said she needs to deal with this. So I see her setting that schedule. And what Jack Smith proposed, which is he's got a brief, I could see her saying, yeah, file it, and then giving Donald Trump time to file his response. And then if it's necessary to have a hearing after she sees the papers, she can schedule it. But I think she's going to want to see the briefs from both sides. Sort of standard procedure in any case, and I think that's what she'll do here, treating Donald Trump like any litigant.
Andrew Weissman, thank you very much for joining us once again. And President Biden was also in Pennsylvania to campaign for Pennsylvania's senior Senator Bob Casey, who is running for re-election. Senator Bob Casey joins us next. President Biden was not just campaigning for Kamala Harris in Pennsylvania yesterday. He was also campaigning for the re-election of Pennsylvania's senior Senator Bob Casey, who Joe Biden affectionately calls Bobby.
Bobby's also a champion of Pennsylvania's energy communities. We passed what's called the Casey Credit, available to 45 Pennsylvania counties where energy jobs such as coal mining had been before and disappeared. Before we came to office, the Casey Credit provides major incentives for companies to build new battery factories, wind turbines, and more to create high-paying jobs in those coal and natural gas communities. And on top of that, there's over $4 billion and private companies have committed to invest in clean energy and advanced manufacturing here in Pennsylvania. $4 billion.
Senator Casey spoke at that same campaign event before the president and vice president spoke.
We've got a lot at stake in this race. The choice has never been clearer between my opponent and me and between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. All that's left is what you all are doing every day. You're knocking on doors. You're making phone calls. You're making contributions. You're going to events. You're engaging your neighbors to get the vote out. That's all the work we have to do over these next 60-plus days, to continue to fight for these values, to continue to make sure that people know that we're on their side against these powerful forces, and to work like hell to get the vote out. So will you join me in working night and day for Kamala Harris?
Senator Casey's re-election campaign has released a new ad about his Trump-endorsed Republican opponent.
Can we believe Dave McCormick about fentanyl?
I never made any investments in the makers of illegal fentanyl.
Don't let him fool you. Here's the truth. McCormick invested millions of dollars in the company that makes 90% of China's fentanyl. 90%. McCormick saw a way to get rich off Chinese fentanyl, a drug that's killing our kids. And now he's lying about it.
I'm Bob Casey, and I approve this message.
Joining us now is Pennsylvania's senior senator, Democrat Bob Casey. He's a member of the Senate Finance Committee. Senator, thank you very much for joining us tonight. That was quite a day in Pittsburgh yesterday, and I noticed your job seemed to be one of the roles you play on this program, which is a campaign coach, explaining to people what needs to be done in this campaign.
Well, Lawrence, it was a great day because we had an opportunity to hear from the president, who has spent many, many Labor Days in Pittsburgh, and he understands the struggles that people have in their daily lives. He also has a sense of how valuable it is to have a unionized workforce, that it strengthens our economy, as he has said so many times, that that unions built the middle class, and I think that's still true today. But he also made clear, and Kamala Harris made this point as well, and I tried to make it in addition to their remarks, that those union rights, labor rights, are under constant attack. Corporations or corporate leaders and the politicians that support them have made attacks on unions kind of the centerpiece of their political agenda. They've tried to kneecap unions for a whole generation now. So we've got to pass the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, not only to strengthen, or not only to protect union rights, but to really to strengthen and expand them. So if you want to protect workers and win this race, please help us at bobcasey.com. We need your help.
I just want to explain to the audience the reason we don't have the famous Casey, Pennsylvania map over your shoulders tonight is you're in a hotel room in Erie, Pennsylvania, and you can't exactly get that up everywhere. I want to go to the Casey credit that we just heard Joe Biden talking about, giving you the credit. For getting that credit in the legislation, tell us how it works.
Hey, Lawrence, as you know, we passed the Inflation Reduction Act. It was the single most important bill to invest in clean energy, and by doing that, to push back against climate change. And one of the ways we do that is to have layers of tax credits. So all kinds of credits to make an investment in clean energy. What I wanted to do was to add an additional layer, and it amounts to 10%, a 10% credit. If you have a clean energy investment, and these are investments that have to be in communities that need these investments in unionized workforces, but to also add to that an investment so that the investments would be directed to those communities that are sometimes left behind, that where there used to be coal mining or used to be an energy economy. Sometimes the jobs leave and there's no way to fortify the community. So this is an additional credit. So a lot of these clean energy companies are not just getting 10 or 20%, they're getting 30, 40, 50% credits. So we added a 10% credit that Governor Shapiro named the Casey credit.
Vice President Harris is catching up with you in the polls. She's 1 point behind you. She's at 51% in Pennsylvania. Latest poll I've seen, you're at 52%. Your opponent's down at 44. Donald Trump is at 47. So it shows the vice president with a 4-point lead and you with an 8-point lead. Is that the way polling's going to look in Pennsylvania from here to the end? Is it possible for any wider margins to open up there?
I think it'll be close at the presidential level. The last race was 1.2% in 2020, so not a big margin. I think my race is going to close a lot, especially this month, because, Lawrence, unfortunately, I hate to report this to you, but I think I'm going to be outspent because my opponent has his own super PAC in addition to his own personal wealth. We're going to be outspent badly in September, so I think we're going to be in a 1 or 2 point race probably by the end of September. So I'd ask folks to help us. If you can go to bobcasey.com, we need a lot of help against these billionaire-funded super PACs, out-of-state billionaires supporting an out-of-state candidate.
Senator Bob Casey, Pennsylvania, thank you very much for joining us once again.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Thank you. And up next, you'll hear from one of the many women who has suffered under the Trump abortion bans that now control the lives of more than 1 in 3 women of reproductive age in the United States. That's next.
I was in a bathroom of a hair salon when I miscarried. The last thing I remember was my husband's face as he desperately tried to stop the bleeding. When I reached the hospital, I had lost nearly half the blood in my body. Doctors told my husband I could die in the operating room. As my husband prayed for my life in the hospital, Donald Trump sat down the road at Mar-a-Lago bragging about overturning Roe v. Wade and calling the abortion bans that he unleashed and that nearly took my life a beautiful thing to watch.
That was Anya Cook speaking today in Florida at a Harris Walls reproductive freedom event. The Harris Walls campaign is planning a bus tour on reproductive freedom that will include women revealing what they have suffered in a country where now more than 1 in 3 women of reproductive age are living under an abortion ban made possible by Donald Trump's Supreme Court appointees. Our next guest, Caitlin Joshua, will be joining that bus tour after she told her story at the Democratic National Convention.
2 years ago, my husband and I were expecting our second child. Our daughter, Lauren, couldn't wait to be a big sister. I was getting ready for her 4th birthday party when something didn't feel right. 2 emergency rooms sent me away. Because of Louisiana's abortion ban, no one would confirm that I was miscarrying. I was in pain, bleeding so much my husband feared for my life. No woman should experience what I endured, but too many have. They write to me saying, what happened to you happened to me. Sometimes they're miscarrying, scared to tell anyone, even their doctors. Our daughters deserve better. America deserves better.
Joining us now is Caitlin Joshua. Caitlin, thank you very much for joining us tonight. What made you decide to discuss this agony publicly?
Again, thank you so much for having me tonight. And what prompted me to start sharing my story was just the vast majority of folks coming out of the Deep South speaking about abortion bans and how they were directly impacted by abortion bans. And I knew that I had to lend my voice to that conversation as someone who has a lived experience as a result of the overturn of Roe v. Wade, which Donald Trump brags about consistently and constantly, speaks about leaving it up to the states. And I know that that approach has harmed so many women, particularly women of color, in this conversation around reproductive justice. And so I would be remiss if I did not share my story and uplift and amplify the pain and agony coming out of what's happened since the overturn of Roe v. Wade in 2022.
You know, when I saw you delivering that story at the convention, I asked right away, could we get you on this program? Because I really, obviously, we've never seen anything like this because for the previous 50 years before that Supreme Court decision, these stories weren't possible in this country. And do you feel that the story and what you've suffered and what others have suffered is actually getting out there?
I do. I've had the privilege and honor of traveling this country in the last 6-7 months with a few of my colleagues or counterparts that were sharing their story on that stage at the DNC. And what we've heard and by vast majority of folks that we've met, anyone from either side of the political parties or whether your political affiliation is Republican or Democrat, what I'm noticing is that folks are understanding and connecting the dots. They know who's responsible for the overturn of Roe v. Wade. They know who's responsible, that person being Donald Trump, for this healthcare crisis that we're facing in this country in 22 states that now have an abortion ban. And we are hearing folks saying that they are going to vote for someone that aligns with their views and doesn't put their family members and themselves at risk and harm's way as a result of living under such a draconian laws and egregious bans. And so I am definitely hearing that folks are voting on this issue. They are concerned about abortion, and it is a top priority this fall.
I know you were able, after that miscarriage, to have another child. And I'm wondering, how worried were you to be pregnant again in Louisiana?
Extremely worried. My husband literally asked me multiple times, are you sure we want to do this? And certainly I understand my privilege in being able to have a second baby. I know plenty of women I've met on the campaign trail or who have written me letters or sent me messages on social media who have said that their fertility has been compromised for the rest of their lives and are looking to other ways to expand their families. So I know that I'm truly blessed to be able to have my son who just turned 1 a week ago, but certainly am not remiss and ignorant when it comes to the fact that a lot of women are faced with having to, make very grave decisions like I did. We literally elected to travel to New Orleans to be able to deliver my son in a place where we did believe in abortion care that would provide that health care should I need life-saving care and during my gestation period or right after the postpartum period. I did my research. I found a provider that, again, believed that in abortion care and was able to provide that for me and my family, but also understand that women should not have to go through that. We should be able to go in our backyards to hospitals that can provide real health care for us and operate with the training and expertise that they've received in medical school, being allowed to be able to practice abortion care should they need it at any point during their pregnancy. And so I certainly do not expect folks to have to, travel or look at their expenses or their costs and try and expand their families. All 50 states should be able to afford this opportunity for people to expand their families safely and with dignity by allowing for us to have full access to abortion care.
Caitlin Joshua, I am so sorry for what you did have to endure in Louisiana, and thank you very much for joining us tonight, and a great happy birthday to 1-year-old Liam.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.